So good morning to everybody. This morning we're going to look at some presentation that I have recently given in London. I was at an apologetics conference in London, and they kind of wanted me to give something that was a bit autobiographical. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself this morning and my own Christian journey. So let's see if I can change the slide there, if I push the right button there. How about if I do that? There we go. Okay. Well, the title of my talk is Confessions of a Compulsive Thinker. I cannot not think, if that makes any sense to you. I think the Lord kind of makes us in particular ways, and so thinking has always been something that's been very important to me. But what I want to talk a little bit about is how we integrate faith and reason in our Christian journey. Faith is a gift of God. Faith in the New Testament, the Greek word is pisteuo, and it means confident trust in a reasonable and a reliable source. So in a New Testament context, you put your faith into someone or something. But now the question is, how does that relate to reason? How does our faith make sense in a broader way? Well, when I was growing up, particularly when I was a teenager, I felt kind of an emptiness and a restlessness in my life. I thought maybe if I became a big league ball player, life would make sense to me. I would find fulfillment and satisfaction. The problem is I just didn't have the skill to do that. On the other hand, I also thought that, well, maybe if I meet the right person, maybe if I get married, maybe if I have picked the right career path, everything will fall into place. But the problem is I still felt that restlessness, and I was looking for something to give my life meaning and purpose. And the problem is I didn't know what it was. I was perplexed by all of that. Unfortunately, my family went through what I would call a family catastrophe. And what that was is my older brother, who was probably the nicest and most gracious samples person you would ever meet. He became addicted to drugs and alcohol. And he was a hippie. And unfortunately, he became addicted to very serious hard drugs. He was addicted to heroin. And ultimately ended up taking his own life. And at that stage, I was 19 years old, and I wondered, wow. Here's my brother. I don't have any more meaning in my life than he had in his life. And it was at that stage I really felt kind of desperate. I wondered, how does my life have meaning? And so I began asking what philosophers call the big questions of life. Who am I and why am I here? Does God really exist? And is there meaning to life? And how should I live my life? And what will happen to me when I die? And so looking through these issues, later I realized that I wasn't the only person who thought this way. In fact, when I became a Christian, I began reading my favorite Christian thinker outside of the New Testament is St. Augustine. And I want you to take a look at what Augustine says, because I think when Augustine wrote his famous book, how many of you have ever, by the way, read his book, The Confessions? Any of you? It's a terrific Christian book, and it's not written just for Roman Catholics. It's written for all Christians. This is what Augustine said. He said, "Man is one of your creatures, Lord, and his instinct is to praise you. The thought of you stirs him so deeply that he cannot be content unless he praises you. Because you made us for yourself, and our hearts find no peace until they rest in you." Well, when I read that, I realized that Augustine wasn't just writing about his own life. I think he was writing about all of our lives. Wanting to be a big league ball player, or wanting to have a career, or wanting to have a family, all of those things are good things. But if we're made for God, then only God is really going to give us satisfaction in life. And so my sister gave me a book by C.S. Lewis. Recently, when I was in England, I visited Lewis's home. And I was thinking as I was walking through his home, I was looking in the bedroom area. Maybe I would see something of the Narnia land while I was there. But C.S. Lewis helped me come to faith. And I remember thinking, I didn't know that Christians could be that careful and thoughtful. And as I read Lewis, I realized that he was a very careful thinker. And he saw faith and reason as coming together. And so C.S. Lewis played a very critical role. Another Christian thinker that kind of helped me understand things is Blaise Pascal. Anybody read Pascal's book, The Pensées, which is French for reflections? That's a terrific book. These are kind of classic Christian apologetic books that unfortunately most Protestants don't read because we kind of think they're Catholic, but Pascal and Augustine were Christians for all denominations and backgrounds. Notice what, let's see if I can go back one here. Yeah. Pascal says, not only do we only know God through Jesus Christ, but we only know ourselves through Jesus Christ. We only know life and death through Jesus Christ. Apart from Jesus Christ, we can't know the meaning of our life or our death, of God or ourselves. And that was very powerful for me because it was only when I discovered Christ that I really discovered who I am and what my purpose is. So when you find the Lord, you also begin to find yourself. He's the one who created us. We instinctually move toward Him. And when we come to know Him, then we find the real vocation for our entire life. And that's certainly been the case for me. So here are two great classics. They're classics of Western civilization, but even more important for people like you and I, they're classics of Christianity. So I encourage you to give them a read. Well, becoming a Christian, I began thinking, how does faith and reason work together? I was a college student. I was a university student. I'm a person of faith, but now how does faith work with reason? And again, I began reading people like Augustine and Anselm, and they had a great expression. They said that we are people of faith, but now that we have faith, we pursue understanding. So faith is trust in a reliable source, but now we have to think and we have to reason about these things. And this is really a great way of approaching these things. For me, and I hope for you, what Norman Geisler says here is right on target. Thinking it's not an option for the Christian, it's an imperative. There's a lot of competition out there, a lot of people who have a lot of different ideas, so we need to be thinking and we need to be reasoning. Well, when I became a Christian, I immediately wanted to share my faith with other people. And this passage became very important to me. Peter says, but in your hearts, that means not in the pump in your chest that pumps blood. Heart the Greek is cardia, it means at the core of your being. Right? At the center of who you are. Set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer, a reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. It's to some people who are very cerebral, like me, sometimes it's easy to argue. It's harder, as Peter says, to do it with gentleness and with respect. And what's critical about that is if you want to convince people that Christianity is true, they're going to look at the way you behave. They're going to measure your demeanor as much as they measure your arguments. And so Peter makes a very careful qualification there. Well, being a person who liked to reason and liked to argue, Paul says there is a place for argument. He says we demolish arguments. He didn't say we demolish people. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So I realized that if I wanted to share my faith, and if there were competitors in the worldview marketplace, then I needed to learn how to reason and how to think and how to critique other competitive arguments. And then lastly, another very important verse when it comes to the enterprise of apologetics, which is simply to defend the faith, right? Harry and his organization do a great job doing that very thing. Here Jude says, "Dear friends, though I was eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt that I had to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to the saints." Well, there is a faith to be defended. And there are particular groups through church history and even today who would like to say, you know, historic Christianity in the Bible, that's not it. We have a new religion. We have a new set of books that you should accept. So there is a historic faith to be defended. Well, all of this simply to say that for me, my faith needed to make sense. I realized that God had made me in a particular way, and faith and reason had to work together. And so I talk a lot about the need for believers to value and cultivate and pursue the life of the mind. But not just to enjoy our own cerebralness, so to speak, but we pursue the life of the mind to the glory of God, because that's who God made us to be. That's what He wants from us. And we have to love God. Well, part of loving God is loving God with your mind. Now, take a look at these symbols up here. These symbols kind of represent what I think are the major worldviews. A worldview is a big picture of reality. A worldview is how you make sense of life and the world. These symbols, I think, represent most of the more than 7 billion people we find on planet Earth today. Of course, the cross is an ancient symbol of our faith, historic Christianity, right? How many Christians are there in the world? Well, if we're very generous and very inclusive, about 2 billion people claim in one way or another to associate themselves with Jesus Christ. So 2 out of the 7 billion, right? 2 billion out of 7 billion follow Christ. But that second symbol, the crescent moon and the star, that's a symbol of what particular religion? Islam. So that's another 1.5 billion and growing number. And Islam is a major competitor to Christianity. Islam says Jesus didn't die on the cross. Islam says people are not sinners by nature. Islam challenges the very heart of the Christian method. It says that the Trinity is false. It says that Jesus is not God in human flesh. That's a major religious competitor. The next symbol is the symbol of the yin-yang, which is really the symbol of an Eastern religion called Taoism. I'm going to use it more broadly to represent kind of all the Eastern mystical religions: Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism, etc. This is kind of the pantheistic way of thinking, that God is not a person, rather God is all things. The universe is God, so to speak. Well, there is maybe another 1.5 billion people that follow that particular philosophy of life. And then notice that the fish has grown legs. It's got feet, right? Darwin, of course, this remarkably successful scientist coming out of the 19th century, who grew up in a Christian home, by the way, whose family members were ministers. Darwin developed a theory to explain life on this planet without the need to appeal to God. And so an evolutionary naturalistic worldview kind of grew out of that, although naturalism had been around a long time before Darwin, and it simply says there is no God. There's no need to have some kind of religious hypothesis. Nature is the sole reality. So here we have those four. And as a young Christian, I realized, wow, not everybody's Christian. There are a lot of competitors out there. Some people think my view is false. How do I bring my faith to the table, to the marketplace of idea with these competitors? Islamic theism, pantheism, naturalism. Well, one thing I knew immediately is they couldn't all be true, and they couldn't all be true because they contradict each other. So I began thinking about these kinds of issues. And what I'd like to share in the few minutes that we have together is I want to talk a little bit about why I think Christianity is true, and to try to provide you with kind of a tool chest, if you will, of a way of approaching this issue. I talk a lot about this idea of explanatory power and scope. And what I simply mean by that is a worldview that explains reality. A worldview that explains a big part of the world, I think is probably going to be true. I mean, one of the things that I most appreciate about Christianity is that my faith explains a whole lot about Ken Samples. It tells me things about myself. It tells me that I'm a sinner. It tells me that I need purpose in life. You know, for example, Islam and the pantheistic religions, Hinduism, they say that human beings are not fallen sinners. In fact, Islam says that people are born good. And I think, wow, does that really match with the man I see in the mirror? Does that match with what I know about humanity? So this question of explanatory power, how well does a worldview explain reality? We call that its power. And how wide is the range of its explanation? Well, as we look a little further here, I'd say a good worldview will explain a broad variety of important data. The more profound the explanatory power, probably the greater assurance that one is encountering a truthful vision of reality. Now, let's talk a little bit about reasoning and logic. And here's why Christians should care about logic. Because to love God, you need to love Him with everything you are. And to love Him with everything you are means to love Him with your mind. Remember, Jesus says, love God with all of your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Now, I don't think Jesus was cutting us into parts. I think what He meant was, give Him everything you've got. Love Him with your entire being. Well, a very important part of us is our mind. And I'll tell you another reason why Christians should care about logic. Because Jesus is called the logic of God. Remember John 1? In the beginning was the Word. That word in Greek is logos. Jesus is the mind of God. If you ever wanted to know what God is like, Jesus represents God. Jesus is the mind of God. Jesus is the thought of God. And so Christians need to think a little carefully about logic. And one of the areas of logic that I have really grown to appreciate is called abductive reasoning. Now, that doesn't mean a UFO comes and takes you away. That's a different kind of abduction. I have another book on that, by the way, but this is a different type of abduction. These are arguments that attempt to arrive at the best explanation for an event. And I think if you have the best explanation for reality, your view is probably true. If your view explains reality, it's going to be in a very good position to gain acceptance in the marketplace of ideas. Well, abductive arguments are different than deduction. They don't provide certainty. They're different from induction in that you don't try to predict something, but it is kind of a unique way of reasoning where we try to provide the best explanation. Now, we can ask the question here, so deduction, if you do it right, if your arguments are valid and sound, then you have certain conclusions. When it comes to induction, if your arguments are strong and cogent, you have probably true conclusions. But notice that abduction is looking for the best explanation. Now, if this seems a little cerebral, let's try to really make it as simple as we can. So here I'm going to quote the New World Encyclopedia. It says, abduction or inference to the best explanation is a method of reasoning in which one chooses the hypothesis that would, if true, best explain the relevant evidence. Abductive reasoning starts from a set of accepted facts and infers their most likely or best explanations. Now, as we think about this kind of thing, you might be asking yourself the question, well, do the Muslims have the best explanation? Or do the Hindus have the best explanation? Or do the Christians, or do the atheists? Well, how do I know who has the best explanation? Well, I think a good criteria of the best explanation is that it's coherent. That means that it's reasonable, it's logically consistent. If your worldview is filled with contradictions, there's a big problem. So is it coherent? Does it fit the facts? Does it explain the facts? Is Christianity a factual religion? I think so. I think it does a good job in that score. Does it balance complexity and simplicity? This is kind of what we call Occam's razor. The simplest, fully orbed explanation tends to be the best. Does it avoid presumption? When you think and argue about truth, you have to be really careful not to presume. You have to try to support your position. So you want to avoid unwarranted presumption. You need to accommodate possible counter-evidence. And a good explanation, therefore, has explanatory power and scope. Now, what's helpful here is, who uses this kind of reasoning? I mean, is this kind of a bizarre form of reasoning? Is this an unusual form of reasoning? It's not. Anybody who engages in what we call who is a diagnostician, if you will, they move from facts or data or events to a coherent, plausible explanation. And this is the way, really, all intelligent people reason. We have these programs, CSI, right? It's wonderful how they resolve these technical issues in 1 hour, right? And how all the people on the program are handsome and pretty. And I didn't know that they recruited such good-looking people. But within an hour, they resolve these kinds of things. But if you do talk to people who are detectives, I have a friend who's a detective. He says, well, we do move from evidence and we develop a theory as to what happened at the crime scene. We go on the crime scene, we see the dead body, the blood, maybe bullet holes. We look at the evidence, we come up with a theory. That's abductive reasoning. Historians do it. They look at the facts and they try to develop a theory that will explain the facts. Scientists look at the data and develop a hypothesis, seek to test that hypothesis, and then develop a theory. So all of the thoughtful, intelligent people engage in a kind of diagnostician way of thinking. Physicians, they look at symptoms and work toward diagnoses. A number of years ago, I had a very serious illness. And it was a brain illness. In fact, my doctor told me the other day, he said, Ken, you need to have your brain examined. I said to him, doctor, if you weren't a doctor, I might get mad at you saying that to me. I've had a lot of people tell me that, by the way, over the years. You need to have your brain examined. A lot of people told me that. But I remember being sick and listening to the doctors talk about me. And I remember I was in the hospital bed, and they were in the hallway kind of having a discussion. And I remember the doctor saying, well, you know, if it were this illness, then we would expect to see these symptoms, but we don't. And then another doctor would pipe up and said, well, that's true, but if it were this, we would expect to see that. And I thought, I wish science and medicine were more certain. But they were engaged in abductive reasoning. They were trying to diagnose my problem. My wife tries to do that, by the way. She's another person who says you need to have your head examined, right? Mechanics do that. When I was a young boy, my father was an automobile mechanic. And sometimes people in the neighborhood would bring their cars and they would pull them into the driveway and my dad would tune up their engines. And I remember being there and my dad would listen to the engine and he would tell the people what was wrong with their car. And I thought, my dad is a shaman. And I'd go around, how many other dads in the neighborhood can listen to a car engine and tell you what's wrong with it? That's virtually supernatural, right? Well, it wasn't supernatural. My dad was engaged in he was a diagnostician. He knew enough about the internal combustion engine to know that if an engine is exhibiting these symptoms, then it's probably the carburetor. Or this person has this problem or that problem. All intelligent people seemingly reason this way. This is a normal, natural way in which people reason. So abductive validation is the process of validating a given hypothesis through abductive reasoning. Under this principle, an explanation is valid if it is the best possible explanation for a set of known data. Brothers and sisters in Christ, I think Christianity is the best explanation for reality. I think Christianity makes the most sense of the world. It's not that other worldviews don't make some sense of the world. They do. But I think Christianity has the broadest explanation. It makes sense of the most meaningful things of reality. So this is, again, kind of the abductive approach. We talk about simple explanations, elegant explanations. My science colleagues, they talk about mathematics being elegant. As a non-mathematics student, I never thought math was elegant. I thought it was something else other than being elegant. But Albert Einstein said that the universe is written in the language of mathematics. Well, how is that possible? Wouldn't mathematics more associate with the mind? Wouldn't there be a great mathematician that would be behind the universe? Again, this is kind of that abductive approach to reasoning. So what is it that Christianity explains so well? I think it explains a lot. Who's Jesus Christ? I've never encountered anybody like Jesus. When I read the Gospels for the first time, I couldn't put the Bible down. I grew up in kind of a nominal Catholic family. I'd never read the Bible before. When I began reading the Gospels, I was captivated. I thought, who is this person? He speaks like nobody else does. He has insight. Well, how are we to explain him? Is he merely a man? Well, if he's only a man, mere men don't say and do the things Jesus did. You know, if you're merely a man, you don't let other people worship you. If you're merely a man, you don't say, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Jesus being merely a man isn't an adequate explanation. Well, is he a myth? No, there's good historical evidence. In fact, to have faith, you have to have knowledge. In fact, knowledge is a part of faith. What do I mean by that? In order to have faith, you have to know certain things about the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. So faith and knowledge are not incompatible. In fact, we Christian philosophers would say that we're part of a knowledge tradition. A lot of people think about faith as, well, it's things I believe that I know aren't true. That's not biblical faith. There's good reason to believe that Jesus existed. Is he a madman? Well, if he is, sign me up. Does Jesus show any sign of being neurotic? By the way, James, the brother of Jesus, I think James, for a long time, thought his brother was a bipolar. He thought he was seriously mentally ill. Remember in the Gospels, Mary and Jesus' brother, we're going to go take control over him. But what happens? James sees Jesus after the resurrection. James becomes the most vocal leader of the church in Acts 15. In fact, I tell my Catholic friends, if there's a pope, it's James, it's not Peter. James moves from thinking his brother is psychologically ill to become the most influential leader in the apostolic church. I think you need to explain that. I think the best explanation is the resurrection. Is Jesus a menace? Does that make any sense? To think that Jesus was an evil person creates a cognitive dissonance, I think. Or was he a mystic? No. Jesus was a good old-fashioned Jew. He believed in one God. He believed God created the world. And he said he was the Savior, the Messiah, the Son of God. Is he a Martian? I don't think that has good explanatory power. And thus, I think the best explanation is Messiah. It's not that these other ways of thinking don't have some explanation. I think Christianity is the superior explanation. We can look at other issues. We live in the universe. Where did the universe come from? How did life begin in this universe? How did consciousness begin in this universe? Do the Darwinian naturalists have a better explanation than the Christian theists? Again, I think this is all kind of an abductive, looking at the arguments, weighing, seeing who has the best explanation. I think that this has a lot of powerful use. And so in closing, who does have the best explanation? Which worldview can explain the cosmos? Is it really reasonable to believe that all matter, energy, space, and time somehow popped into existence from nothing by no one? Even if you're Stephen Hawking, who says that very thing, I still don't think that's a reasonable position. I think you need somebody who brought the universe into existence, and that's exactly what the Judeo-Christian scriptures teach us. Life, ethics, abstractions, things like numbers and universals, moral principles, religion. I think Augustine's right. I think we're made for God. And I think if you try to fill that emptiness and restlessness with drugs and alcohol, or if you try to pursue pleasure, hedonism, or even if you approach it from a standard, respectable way of life, if you try to pick a career path, or you try to get married, I think that you will discover that some of those things are very good things, but we're made for God. And it's only when we come to know Him by His grace, when He gives us salvation, something we can never earn. When we begin to trust in Him, we realize that we were made for Him. And He is, in fact, the best explanation. This is all what we call a cumulative case, multiple lines of converging evidence together to support our theory. And let me simply say that I think this is a very natural way. And so when skeptical people or people who hold other religious worldviews tell me that Christianity is kind of odd or strange, I say no. I think Christianity is a way of looking at the world and a way of explaining reality. And my mind can't comprehend everything. I've been working on trying to figure out how God is one in essence and three in personhood, you know, to come up with a theory to explain the Trinity. I haven't been able to do it. In fact, nobody can, because God is infinite and we're finite. So there are things I can't get my mind around. But that doesn't mean that faith doesn't make sense. I like to say that faith involves knowledge, and it's compatible with reason. There are good reasons to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. Everything I've said this morning, I try to sketch out in a new book that I have, and it's at the back of the church. You're certainly welcome to take a look at it. Thank you very much. I hope that maybe I've given you a few ways of building a tool chest that teaches us that even compulsive thinkers can be believers. So thank you very much.